is going. Here we are, first session of Twin Cities Drupal 2019. I'm feeling good. Van Halen helped get me ready to do this presentation early in the morning here. This is automated testing right now. My name is Steve Persch, lead developer advocate at Pantheon. You can find me as stevector just about all over the internet, Twitter, Drupal.org, GitHub, WordPress.org as well. Pantheon, if you don't know about us, we're a website operations platform for both Drupal and WordPress. I've got a lot to cover here today, so I'm just going to dive right into it. Here's the agenda, what's going to get covered in this presentation here today. We're going to start out by talking about the test-driven development dream. That sunshiny, amazing rainbows idea about writing your tests first. They're perfect, they're amazing, and I think they might get in the way of actually adopting automated testing if right now you are not doing any automated testing. So I'll talk about that dream because I think it's somewhat the elephant in the room when talking about automated testing. And then I'll go on to talking about specific forms of automated testing, visual regression, code sniffing, unit and system tests, performance and accessibility audits that you can run in an automated fashion. And I'm going to close it out with something that's not quite automated testing, something that I call demo-driven development. All right, so the test-driven development elephant in the room. Just out of curiosity, by show of hands, who here has heard of or done test-driven development? All right, maybe half the room, maybe more than half the room has heard of or done test-driven development. I've done it a few times, but more often than not, I have done it in a dream. I haven't done it quite as often as I would like. In the test-driven development dream, I'm standing at my standing desk, and that's the first indication that I'm in a dream state. I do have a standing desk, but most of the time in my workday, I am not standing at my standing desk. I'm sitting in a meeting room. Maybe I'm sitting on the couch with my laptop. Maybe I'm sitting at my desk. Maybe 1 hour a day in real life I'm actually standing at the standing desk. But in the test-driven development dream, even that part is better. So I'm standing at my standing desk. I have a great or near perfect understanding of the website that I'm about to build. It's in my head. I've had great conversations with my client, and the thing that I'm going to do now is fluidly transfer those requirements from my brain, through my fingertips, into my ergonomic split keyboard that I got on Kickstarter in 2015. It didn't arrive until 2017. Even now here in 2019 in real life, I'm not all that comfortable on the split ergonomic keyboard. I can maybe use it for 20 minutes before I just go back to the regular keyboard. But in the test-driven development dream, even that is different. I'm typing perfectly on the split ergonomic keyboard. It's wonderful. I'm writing tests. I'm writing PHP unit assertions. I'm writing BHAT scenarios that accurately describe exactly what this website is going to need to do. Now, I haven't written any website code yet. Again, I'm doing test-driven development. I'm writing the tests first. I know these tests are going to fail because I don't have any website code yet. I run my tests and they fail. That's okay. That's what I expected. I take a swig from my Berry LaCroix. It has a red can, just like my red failing tests. In this test-driven development dream, it's an unlimited, always cold can of Berry LaCroix. I take a swig, and I change mindsets. I'm now writing my website code. I'm writing the functionality that is going to make these tests pass. And I'm doing it perfectly. I've got a perfect understanding of Drupal. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm clicking all the right buttons in this dream state, and then I run my tests again, and they start to pass, and I'm satisfied with what I've done. I take a swig from my other hand of a lime LaCroix, actually a key lime LaCroix, the new best flavor of LaCroix. It's got a green can, like my green passing tests, and all is right with the world in this test-driven development scenario. Who here has had a dream like that about what test-driven development is going to be? Maybe not with the LaCroix, maybe not with the standing desk, but in the test-driven development dream, you get some really, really big benefits. The process itself, writing the tests first, promises to help you write better code. Not only are you going to write the features that your client expects better, because you'll be defining them very specifically in advance before you write the code that delivers those features. Even at a micro level, at the level of what arguments do I need to pass into this function that I'm writing. Even that promises to get better if you're writing the tests first, because you'll be thinking about the code you're writing in a deeper, more fundamental way. You're going to get maximum regression testing value. Pretty much all automated tests promises this value in one way or another. If the tests are doing what they're supposed to do, they should fail if we break something. And if we write the tests first, then we have a maximum time window where those tests are there running, able to fail if something actually breaks. If we write the test later, that time window gets shorter. I think the big promise of test-driven development is changing the way you work, changing the feeling of working even. I find much of the anxiety of web development is about uncertainty. I'm clicking through Drupal and I don't know exactly what I want, but if I write the test first, then I should know exactly what I'm trying to do. Eliminate uncertainty. I'm gamifying my job. It's literally like playing a video game where you're converting red failing tests to green passing tests. Somehow, though, the time never seems right to achieve this dream. Somehow it seems like this is something that we can do on the next project. Somehow I'm not certain I actually know enough about PHP unit to do this efficiently, so I should just wait until I learn it better. Maybe I need to wait until my next job. Maybe I need to wait until I get a better client who's going to accept me writing automated tests. I think we can change that mindset. I think we can add automated tests right now. I don't think you need to wait for the perfect project to come along and write tests from the very beginning. So I'm going to describe a couple of different project phases. And I'm going to start with the exact opposite of the beginning of the perfect project. Let's talk about the end of a bad project. Let's talk about the end of a zombie project, a website you didn't even build. None of your current coworkers built this site. This is a site that you somehow inherited. It's a site you don't have a great understanding of, but it is now your responsibility to update this website. And you might fall into the myth of thinking it's just not worth the time to add any automated tests because you need to know exactly how the website works in order to write tests for it. Let's imagine this is even a WordPress site. It's not even a Drupal site that you're familiar with. It's a system you don't know. If I'm tasked with updating a website that I don't really understand, I think I'm going to try visual regression testing. This is a form of automated testing. And before I talk about the automation piece, let's just describe the conceptual process. If I need to update a WordPress site that I'm not that familiar with, I'm going to try and first do that update not on the live site, but on a development instance. Maybe a dev site on Pantheon, maybe on my local laptop. I'm just going to apply the update, cross my fingers that nothing is going to break. So far, it looks like this site, I mean, it's basically a hello world site, but it doesn't seem to be broken. That's good. I can look at the live site. This is now a different URL, and it looks basically the same. So far, so good. I'm confident that WordPress hasn't broken this site in the update. If I want to be really thorough, I could even look at the two versions of the site right next to one another. And if anything is different, that's an indication that something broke. But it looks like it's all the same. I can even do that at different screen resolutions. And again, it looks like it's pretty much the same. Now, if I'm super sharp, if my eyes are perfect, then I'm going to see that actually something did change. That when I updated WordPress, I now have this search for label. And the button isn't just the magnifying glass, it also contains the word search. That's not necessarily a break per se, but it's a change that I don't know if I wanted. The part that does look a little bit broken though is the button itself now has a margin that looks off. In the old version of the site with just the magnifying glass, there's an even margin along all the sides of the button, but in the updated version, the margin seems to have shifted. There's a bigger margin on top and no margin on the bottom. That seems broken. Now, if I had just deployed this update straight to the live environment because I had looked at it and it looked fine in my brief manual inspection, there's a good chance the client is going to come back and ask, why did you break the search button? I would look at it and I would think, oh, I didn't break it. It still searches, but it looks off. This type of check-in is much easier to do if you have a robot helping you. If you have a robot that can just take screenshots of one environment, take a screenshot of the live environment, compare the two, overlay them. You can scrub back and forth. You can highlight in pink here the places that are different, because there's extra text added, everything below that is off visually. This is a tool called Backstop. There are a million tools like this. Backstop is one that I happen to like that will help you do this job for you. You might not think of this as automated testing in the test-driven development sense. Like, I didn't describe to a computer the behavior I wanted. I just took pictures and compared them. This is a computer just helping me do a task that I would have done manually. It's helping me do it faster and better. Visual regression does have some limitations. You are likely to get a lot of false positives, even some false negatives. If you have content in a sidebar that's changing on every page load, if you have a slider that's moving around, there's a good chance that in taking those screenshots and overlaying them, there will be a difference that isn't a breakage, but the computer has no way of knowing that. It only knows that the pixels are different. You can also just get noise of say, a CSS sheet doesn't load in time, an image doesn't load in time, and suddenly it fails because of that. Overall, this is still a big time savings. It's helpful if you can connect this up to a continuous integration process, but this is valuable even if you're just running a tool like this locally on your laptop. Configure it to point to your local environment, configure it to point to the live environment, take screenshots and compare the two. If you're only updating these zombie sites every few months, that's probably enough of a change to help you save time. Let's talk about another stage in a project lifecycle. We're moving earlier, so the zombie project is near the end. Let's now talk about something still late in a website's life, a workflow overhaul stage. Perhaps you've got one website that's live, perhaps you have lots of websites that your team is working on, and you've decided we're going to completely overhaul our workflow. We need continuous integration, we need all these cool things that we're seeing at conferences, and you can fall into a bit of a trap here. You can fall into a trap of thinking, well, I can't run my tests in a continuous integration environment until I write some tests, but I can't write my tests until I have a place to run them. And I find that sort of catch-22 or that chicken and the egg problem can just get you stuck. So let's get unstuck. If the place we're trying to get is to a place where we can push our code to GitHub or something like that, and then have multiple automated tests run and let us know if things are good or not, the first thing we're going to need is to just get one. How do we just get one green checkbox that tells us something in an automated fashion? There's a million tools that are involved here, but we can simplify, I think, with a tool called code sniffing. By code sniffing, I'm referring to a tool that will automatically check whether or not we're in compliance with Drupal coding standards. So Drupal, WordPress, all these communities have essentially arbitrary rules, like tabs versus spaces is not something PHP as a computer program cares about all that much. You could have 10 tabs or 20 spaces, and PHP doesn't really care. But humans reading this code, we care a lot. We care about control statements should have one space between the control keyword and the opening parentheses to distinguish them from function calls. No space before the parentheses on a function call. Do use a space if you're using an if-else or something like that. Again, an arbitrary distinction, but a distinction that the Drupal community especially cares about a whole lot. This is something that I think is best done in an automated fashion. You can use an automated tool that will check whatever files you tell it to check. And the reason I recommend this as the first automated test to add, if you're looking to go from 0 automated tests to 1 automated test, is because it's relatively easy to add. Again, you don't have to decide on the rules. The Drupal community has already decided on rules for us. There's also just a very clear pass or fail. You're not going to get a false positive like you might with visual regression. You're not going to get something debatable like a behavioral test that's checking the behavior of a site where it's just debatable what the behavior should be. The Drupal community has decided on these standards, and either you're complying or you're not. I would recommend starting with a small set of files that are already clean. If you've got a big code base with lots of custom modules, there's a good chance if you haven't been running automated tests, there are lots of places where comments are too long, or there's an incorrect number of line breaks, something like that. I don't think you need to go fixing all of those. I think you can start with a small file that's clean, get that green checkbox saying, yes, that tiny custom module is in compliance with the Drupal coding standards. And then if your code base continues to evolve, if you have reason to edit those other files, then start checking those other files also with the code sniffer. You don't have to pause everything and do these fixes in a whole day of work. The other big reason I recommend doing this in an automated fashion is because I think it's actually counterproductive to do this manually. I used to work on teams where we would say we were following the Drupal coding standards, but we didn't check it automatically. That meant when someone submitted new code for review, often the first bits of feedback they heard were, that comment is too long. You have a period in the wrong spot. You're using the wrong number of spaces. That's not great feedback to get as a peer. If I'm showing my coworker, hey, I worked on this feature all week, I think the client is going to love it, and the first 5 things I hear back are, your comment is too long, you have the wrong line breaks, and then I don't hear anything else, I think, wait, is that all the feedback I'm going to get from my coworker? I think you shouldn't even bother doing those things manually. That feedback is much easier to get from a computer. You're not going to create friction among team members. All right, let's move to an even earlier phase in a project lifecycle, the post-launch bug fixing. Somehow for a lot of clients, they don't pay that close of attention to what the website is really doing until the site has launched. And then perhaps they really start using it, and perhaps they start finding bugs, even in things where they didn't specifically describe exactly what they wanted. Now, this is a time where you can write those behavioral style tests that you might write if you're doing test-driven development, the tests that describe what the behavior is supposed to do. Now, at this point in time, you might think, oh, it's just not worth it. The functionality is already written, or mostly written. It's just not worth it to write tests now. The client wants as many bugs fixed as fast as possible. It's not worth my time to write a test at this point. Well, if you think it's bad for your client to be reporting bugs, if that's something that you don't like, if it's annoying, if it's a frustrating part of the process to be hearing about bugs, I find it is much, much worse, much more painful to hear about the same bug a week later after I thought I fixed it. That was one of the worst moments in client work for me. If I say, oh, I fixed that bug, and a week later or a month later they have to come back and say, hey, that thing that you fixed, I don't know if you ever really fixed it, but it broke again if you ever did fix it. That's when I think it is worthwhile to write unit tests or system tests for the bugs that you're fixing. So if we're talking about bugs, then we need a working definition of a bug. I think a bug is basically just a mismatch between the actual behavior of the website and what your client expects. So that leaves room for a lot of gray area. It requires you to define what you expect. Let's take an example scenario. So I've worked on plenty of websites where one of the content types, one of the things we need to display on the Drupal website is events, either theater performances or colleges that host live events like this one. We want to show events on the home page, and when events are old, we want them off of the home page. Now, maybe when you were building the site, the client said, oh, it's fine. We're going to use that promote to front page checkbox that's in Drupal core. That's fine. That's how we'll put events on the home page. Maybe they forget that they said that, and now they're asking, why is that event that's a week old still on the home page? Events should be automatically removed as soon as they're in the past. Okay, how can we write an automated test for that? I think scenarios like that are helpfully tested with a tool called bhat. This is a tool that lets you describe in plain language, in a language that's understandable, ideally to your clients, the behavior that is being checked. So we've got events in the future. That's one scenario we need to account for. How are we actually going to test that? Well, we're going to need our automated testing system to log in as a content administrator, create an event with a date in the future, verify that it appears on the events page in the upcoming events section, and it's supposed to appear on the homepage. It's an upcoming event. Nothing revolutionary there. The fancy part about bhat is that it has a way to translate these plain language sentence fragments into executable code, actually interacting with your Drupal website and verifying that this is happening. Another scenario, events in the past. This is the one that apparently is broken. So how do we test that? We log in as a content administrator. We create an event with a date in the past. We verify that it does not appear on the home page, and on the events page it's supposed to appear in the past events section. So nothing revolutionary, but something that clearly defines what is expected, and we can run that test over and over again. So if the behavior ever changes because we click on the wrong thing in views or something else we don't even know about changes, that test is going to fail and let us know that we need to go back and pay attention. Let's take an example of a unit test.
How does it let you know? Does it send you an email?
The common way that it would let you know is you would have some system that runs all of your tests, and anytime you submit new code, you're looking for those green check boxes saying your tests pass. If for some reason in that example old events were still appearing on the home page, that test would fail and it would be red, and then the thing that's supposed to happen afterwards, either merging the code to the master branch, would be blocked, or if it failed in like a deployment scenario, the deployment from a dev environment to a live environment would just be stopped because tests failed. And I recently configured Slack notifications because I'd rather get a Slack notification when something like that fails than an email. So another example here, unit tests. So testing the very small pieces of code that we're writing. We're not testing the overall behavior of the website, we're testing a single function. Let's imagine we have a function in our code. I apologize here for showing code in slides. I know it's a bit of a taboo, but it is relatively simple code that I'll just talk us through. So we've got a function here that's checking if the person visiting the website, if the user agent visiting the website is iOS. We need to change the behavior of our website for people visiting from those small Apple devices. And it's a pretty simple function. We're just going to check if the user agent contains iPad, and if so, return true. Simple enough. We'll check if it's an iPhone. If so, return true. And if it's not one of those two things, false. It is not an iOS device. Now, let's imagine our client says, hey, I just bought a new iPod. Apple still sells iPods, and they have browsers, and I'm not getting the behavior I expect. That is an iOS device, but my function here isn't checking for the iPod case. I'm checking for iPhones and iPads, but now I have a mismatch between my expected behavior. I now expect that iPods are supposed to return true, but that is not what's happening. So I'm going to write unit tests that check just the behavior of this one unit, this one function. So first, I want to write a passing test for what I already have. I'm not exactly doing test-driven development here because let's imagine this function was already written, but now, all right, I am writing tests. Let's first cover what we've already got. Let's test that the iPhone case is still functional. The way we're going to test that with PHP unit is we're just going to call that function and give it an example that is supposed to return true. It is an iOS device. So we give it a simplified user agent string that contains iPhone, and it is supposed to return true, and we just check that our actual return value from that function matches what we expect. Pretty much all automated tests in one way or another are comparing what you expect to what is actually happening. So in this case, this is something that should just pass. Testing an Android device, a similar thing. What is the actual return value from this function? If we give it an Android device, what do we expect? We expect false. We assert that these two things are equal to one another, and this is supposed to pass. This is supposed to pass. This is what our function is already doing. Now we want a failing test. A failing test for the iPod condition. So we're going to write a very similar test. We're going to call that function. We're going to give it the iPod string. Then it's going to give us an actual return value from that function. We want it to be true. We want this function to tell us that, yes, an iPod is an iOS device. We're going to check that these two things are equal to one another. But right now, our code doesn't do what we want it to do. So this test is going to fail. But even if we're working in a style that is not truly test-driven, we can get a bit of that feeling of turning failing tests into passing tests. We just make our function a little bit more complicated. We add one more else-if statement, and we check for the iPod user agent, and we're going to return true in that case. Now our test, if we run it again, is actually going to pass, and we're going to get one more benefit from our automated test. We can refactor our code and know whether or not it's still doing what we expect to do. I didn't like those 3 if statements. That seemed like overkill. That just seemed like too much work. How about I just check a regular expression? Does my user agent contain one of these 3 strings? If so, return true. If not, return false. So I can get more of the benefits of automated testing, even if I'm not doing test-driven development from the very beginning of my project. This is going to pass as well. I've refactored safely. So when you're working with unit or system tests, you are responsible for writing the behavior that you expect. And you do have to pick from a ton of different testing frameworks. There are whole presentations that'll just help you choose between different testing frameworks. My main recommendation here, though, is to focus on writing tests at the level in which you are working. I've heard a lot of recommendations, both in the Drupal community and outside, that the majority of your tests should be unit tests. That is the right way to do it. Unit tests are better, they're faster. I don't know if that's true. When I'm building a Drupal website, very rarely am I writing new units. I'm clicking together views and content types. I'm configuring an entire system. I think the test I need to write in that case is a system test that is checking the whole system. If you are writing new units, if you're writing a brand new function, if you're writing a brand new class, it might be appropriate to unit test just that thing. But if the work you're doing is a configuration of an entire system, you'll need system tests. All right, moving even earlier in time, the pre-launch site building phase, when you might hear this or run into a situation like this with your client, where your client says they care about performance and accessibility, but they keep asking for things that are making performance and accessibility worse. What can you do in that situation to avoid hearing this from your client right at the last minute? The website is slow. Can you make it faster? This is something I unfortunately have heard a week or 2 days before the website launches. The site is great, it looks good, it does everything it's supposed to, but it's slow. Can you just make it fast? That's not a situation you want to be in. I think one way you can avoid that situation is by running automated performance and accessibility checks as well. So this is a screenshot from a tool called Lighthouse. It's built into Chrome right now. You can open up the Chrome developer tools, click the button, it'll run this report for you on demand. You can also run this report every day. You can run this report anytime code changes. And as we can see here, there's room for improvement on Drupal.org. With tests like this, it's simply better to know. If the site you're building is getting progressively slower and slower, and as a developer you kind of suspect that that's happening, your client's going to catch on eventually. They're going to notice that the website is slow, and they might notice too late. It is better to know this earlier rather than later. Yes, the message of this talk overall is you can add automated testing at any time, but this one is one where I really recommend the earlier the better, because websites tend to get slower the more features you build into them. Caveat here, these tests are not perfect, especially when it comes to accessibility. A high accessibility score in Lighthouse is not the same as a human being interacting with a website with a visual impairment or with a physical impairment. In order to know your website is truly accessible, you are going to need some level of manual testing in addition to the automated checks that give you a smaller indication. Let's move to the earliest point in a project's history, the discovery phase. This is when we're supposed to be able to do test-driven development. Let's imagine we've got this perfect project, but wait, this might actually feel too early. If we're at the stage where we just have sticky notes on a whiteboard, if we're in a discovery meeting, like that doesn't feel like a time where I'm supposed to be writing PHP unit tests. That doesn't feel like a time I'm supposed to be writing code that's going to check things. What do I do? So this is a place where you might try something like behavior-driven development, those BHAT scenarios like I described before that showed the past events and the future events. But I'm going to recommend something a little bit different, something I call demo-driven development. This is not automated testing. This is just write down the way you're going to show your client that the thing is done. If you're in the phase of sticky notes, where you're just writing down what you think the website is going to do in somewhat vague terms, I think it's important to think about how am I going to show my client that this thing is actually done? If they're asking for an events section where there's past events and there's future events and events are appearing in different sections, I should just write down how I'm going to show them that that thing actually works. If you're doing demos at the end of every sprint, every 2 weeks, if you're doing demos at the end of the month, even if you're just doing a demo all the way at the end of the project, you are going to have to show your client eventually that this thing does what they asked for. In the case of the past or future events, I'm probably just going to sign in as an administrator. I'm probably going to make an event with the date in the past, probably going to save that event, I'm going to go to the events listing page, show that the test event is under past events, go to the home page, it's not on the home page. So not all that complicated, but this is something that I started doing at my last job on the recommendation of some of my coworkers who were very interested in formalizing how we demonstrated to our clients the work that was done in a given sprint, especially if you're on a project that has multiple developers and only one developer or a project manager is doing the demo. They need to know, how am I supposed to show that the past and future events feature is working? If I'm not the one who wrote the code for that feature, if I'm not the one who reviewed it, how am I supposed to demo it to the client? If you just write into your tickets the steps for a human being to demo something, not only are you making it easier on your coworkers, you are taking a small step towards behavior-driven development. If you write just human-friendly instructions for how you're going to demo things, you then can ask yourself, which of these are really, really important? Or which of these are likely to regress? Which of these are likely to break in the future? And then maybe just automate that subset. You don't need 100% test coverage. Any test coverage is better than no test coverage. So this also, I think, helps you avoid the headaches of just choosing between these different testing frameworks. I think that can be a big blocker for teams that are looking to get into automated testing for the first time. There are a lot of different tools to choose from, but if you're just starting with demo-driven development, you shortcut those headaches. My closing message here is that while test-driven development can be really helpful, it can help focus your work, there's a certain angle from which automated testing is helpful, simply from asking the question, what can robots do better than me and faster than me? If I'm not completely overhauling the way I think about my job and the way I do things, if I just want to do my job a little bit better and a little bit faster, can I describe the thing that I'm doing to a robot and have them do it? If the thing that I literally would be doing when I have to update a WordPress site is loading it on my local machine, looking at the live site, and then manually looking at the two together, if that is the thing that I'm doing and I can describe it that specifically, I can tell a computer about that process and have the computer do it faster and better than me, freeing me up to do more valuable work that a computer can't do. So thank you so much for listening here. Thank you. And we have a few minutes for questions. All right, thanks. Any questions at all? Yes, right in the back.
The code sniffing example, I noticed you got a bit of a code up there.
Oh, yeah.
What is that exactly doing? I saw you
Sure.
CI, PHPCs.
Yeah, so that was an example of too many slides. That was an example where I submitted a pull request to my own code repository that was intended to break. So what we're seeing here is there should be no white space after an opening parentheses. Expected 0 spaces between opening bracket and type hint. Array, 1 found. So,
I was curious about the specific tools you're using.
Oh, sure.
PCS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll go to the actual repository where this ran. I should have linked that. So this is a Drupal 8 repository. It's a complete Drupal 8 site that I have on GitHub, and all the code changes come through the GitHub mechanism of pull requests. So what this pull request is showing me here is that I've changed one file in this Git branch. This was an example where I made a bunch of changes that I knew would trigger coding standard violations. So yeah, put in spaces and line breaks in places that would trigger errors, made really long comments, things like that. So the way I've set up this repository is that anytime I make a pull request, anytime I propose any code changes, a number of automated tests run. I clicked on the wrong thing there. I think I want to click on this red X. So it's showing me that, in this case, 2 continuous integration jobs, as they're called in Circle CI, the tool that's running these things. 2 jobs failed because they were both running this check. So the composer piece here is that I've put a handful of tests into my composer.json file in this repository, so I'll go take a peek at that. So I have one script here that's, I should blow this up, one script here that's running code sniffs, and what it's doing is calling the executable PHP code sniff. It's giving it the standard Drupal. It's saying check files that end in .php, .module, etc. Ignore the node modules directory. This would run a lot slower if it traversed through a node modules directory. Also ignore the vendor directory because I'm not checking code that I didn't write. So it's checking specifically my custom modules directory. That's what this part is doing. It's saying check. So actually, as I talk about this out loud, I suppose these are kind of redundant. I don't have a node modules directory in my custom modules directory, but I suppose better to double cover. So checking both custom modules and custom themes. And if I wanted to get more specific than this, I could point this at just the one file that I knew was passing. And then if I evolve my code base and I fix more of these problems, I could have it check 2 files, or I could have it check a whole directory, and then another directory, and then another, until all of my custom code is covered. And there's even a syntax, if you need it, for within one file, basically putting in a specialized comment saying, ignore everything after this line, code sniffer, because I'm not touching it. And then you can then add in another comment saying, okay, code sniffer, you can start paying attention again. And I think I've used that in 1 or 2 places in this site.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So the Circle CI is one. Are there others that are, I don't know, more popular or used?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the thing that actually runs the test, on some level, all Circle CI is doing is running the bash commands that I ask it to run. Another alternative, if you're using a GitHub-based workflow, would be GitHub Actions. It's basically a competitor to Circle CI that's just a part of GitHub. If you're using GitLab, GitLab has its own CI service built into GitLab. I think that's going to make it a popular option, especially as Drupal.org has switched over to GitLab. It's one less tool to worry about or potentially pay for. One of the reasons I like Circle CI is that it has a freemium model. Basically, you can use a small amount for free and evaluate whether or not you like it, and you can do that in perpetuity. Like I personally don't pay for Circle CI, but Pantheon as a whole, we've got dozens of engineers. We're running lots of tests all the time, so we have a paid plan with them. Bitbucket is another both code repository, and they have a tool called Bitbucket Pipelines that does a similar thing of running automated tests for you. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everyone.